to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley, Ph.D., reporting to you from Washington, D.C. It is the afternoon of May 18th, 2018, as we're recording, and many of you will hear this on Saturday or Sunday. And we have much to report. We have a renewed flare-up of controversy about indicting the tenant of the Oval Office. We have a continuation of the polemics about impeaching the tenant of the White House. We've also got a tall order, a long list of new abuses and violations. One high point this week was the first equivalent or practical equivalent of a criminal referral against that infamous tenant of the Oval Office for failing to report. I think this is about a year in jail and a fine of $25,000 or something like this. But still, it would be a federal crime. So there's the first criminal referral from the Office of Government Ethics to the Department of Justice, to Rosenstein, I believe. I would commend that to Rosenstein's particular attention. Right? Justice delayed is justice denied. And we've also got the continuing aftermath of this outrageous, really self-destructive, anti-national, some would say treasonous move of dumping the Iran nuclear accord, at the same time betting everything, a complete appeasement, full court press on the North Koreans, who have responded in their characteristic way of reneging, backtracking, finding fault, evading, lying. These are, of course, this is the closest thing we have to actual Stalinist communists in the world today. So don't be surprised. We've got that entire complex, right? The two wars, the Far East War and the Middle East War, their relations and why it doesn't go smoothly, of course. And perhaps the most disturbing in many ways, the crisis that is now emerging between the United States and the traditional allies in Western and Central Europe, and even in Eastern Europe, the European allies, and what these antics, right, this idiocy, this absolutely imbecilic policy on Iran, and the Sir Neville Chamberlain Act, the Munich sellout appeasement routine towards Kim Il-sung, which has received this momentary reverse, or perhaps permanent reverse, we don't know. The fact that relations are now souring with the people you have to keep on your side. Remember, think of Europe and Japan as the two wings. They are both indispensable. And, of course, these bunglers, right, these morons and amateurs in the White House, they simply have no idea of what they're doing. They have not got an inkling of the way that the world actually works. And when we get down to impeachment, the big lesson is that somebody like Lawrence Tribe, whatever his merits, I suppose he's had some, that when Tribe tries to surround impeachment with this aura of the sacred temple, somehow that this is something you've got to go away and meditate for 10 years before you dare to bring it up. This is absolutely the wrong approach. The narrow, legalistic, pedantic approach to impeachment is wrong. Impeachment is more than anything else to prevent future harm, to prevent World War III, to prevent a Middle East war, to prevent a Far East war, to prevent the collapse of the alliances around the world, right? Probably the most serious blow you could inflict, short of actual shooting, bombs, and so forth. And we have that little matter that was front and center last year, genocide against the American people. When you impose that kind of austerity, you take away Obamacare with no replacement, then when you're talking about 50,000 needless deaths, you have reached the fateful threshold of genocide against the American people. And these things that are now looming in the future, if this exercise in imbecility and moronic politics goes on, this cruel and stupid regime, cruel and stupid is the minimum of what they are, why then you've betrayed the Constitution. Constitution is not, repeat, not a suicide pact. And there's plenty of room within the letter and the spirit of the Constitution to proceed both to the indictment and to the impeachment, given the current situation of the Republican Party, and given the substantial possibility that these things may occur now within the next 5 to 6 months. I believe we're 5 months to the November election, and then we'll have to wait for months after that before the actual majority changes. We've got some real serious problems. You can't make this depend on somebody's idea that it has to be bipartisan. We'll talk about this, but go back to 1999. Was that bipartisan? 98, 99, impeachment at the end of 98 and the trial in 99. Was that bipartisan? Did Newt Gingrich and company retire to a monastery and contemplate for 3 years before they dared to do it? No, they did it. And it was not bipartisan. And it was criminal. They did it anyway on the basis of nothing. No treason, no collusion, none of that. Just some hanky-panky with this charming young lady. And that became impeachment. Are we crazy? And now Tribe is going to tell us that we have to watch out. We even have the New York Times, right? The New York Times has tried to rehabilitate itself now in the last 18 months or so, right? That they've come to see the downside of Trump. Remember, and we will review this, right? The New York Times has indirectly, slyly admitted this week that they were instrumental in shielding Trump from the obvious conclusions about Russian connections, Russian collusion, Russian conspiracy. And in particular, they have been forced to go back to their article of October 31st, my God, Halloween, and it was not a Halloween prank, it was serious. This was the essence of bad journalism. This is the same New York Times that had Judith Miller telling you all about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The New York Times of October 31st, 2016, that there were no visible links. That authoritative FBI sources said there were no visible links between Trump and the FB and the Russians, according to the FBI. That's who we're listening to. If you listen only to them, that's why you should be listening here. And thank your lucky stars that you are. So let's start, I guess, with the impeachment question, right? Or the way this is building up, and the question of future harm. Now let's look at the future harm, because this is the big picture. Impeachment is not some narrow thing. It's not impeachment for itself. It's impeachment to prevent war, genocide, and other calamities. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. We want you to be aware that the Tax Wall Street Party, the United Front Against Austerity, and other like-minded groups, the list is growing, will be present at the Left Forum in New York City that will be held, 2 weeks plus from now, specifically the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of June. Those are the dates for the Left Forum as a whole. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of June. This will be at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice. Hopefully this has no specific, it does not act as an omen, except for somebody else that we know. And in some ways, that's what it will be about. Anyway, it's over on the west side, right? 10th Avenue, more or less beyond, down by the Hudson River on the waterfront. John Jay College of Criminal Justice, New York City. So the Left Forum. Now, we don't know yet, at least I don't know, what day and time we're going to be on there. So it's a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, right? It's your typical weekend conference. It's the biggest one of so-called leftists. And, of course, we here are the representatives. I hope we're reasonably authoritative. We represent the tradition of the New Deal, the tradition that got things done, that defeated fascism, ended a depression, put a man on the moon, defeated communism, and so forth. In other words, the New Deal, the most advanced form of human organization yet developed in actual history, apart from various plans or outlines, right, which may have merit, but this was getting it actually done in the framework of world history. So we're the New Deal, and we will hold the New Deal banner high at the Left Forum. So why don't you save the date? The Friday is usually the opening ceremony, so sometime between Saturday the 2nd and Sunday the 3rd, we're going to be coming at you with 2 panels, one about the deep state. Oh, it's timely, it's timely. The Republicans, the reactionaries, the Trumpists are all screaming and whining about how the deep state is trying to do them in. Wrong, boys. As usual, your epistemology stands reality on its head. The deep state is why Trump is there in the first place. The FBI slow walk, the New York Times distortions, and on and on. Comey, the greatest help that Trump got on his way. Well, maybe competing with the KGB, competing with the SVR and the GRU, but that's the deep state. So we'll have one about those. The deep state, what it is and how it put Trump into office. So this is different. This is not what you're going to hear on cable news. They'll say, of course, there's no deep state. Yeah, there is. Yeah, there is. There really is. And what you saw there was the deep state in action. So that's one. And then we want to go back and develop these 3 ballot questions that appeared on the ballot in the Texas Democratic primary, and they passed by 93 to 95% each. And it was, should there be a Medicare for all healthcare system? Yes. Should there be a system whereby, and we found that out this week, that the student loan burden, the student loan burden has now reached $1.5 trillion. We've got 4 million people who are having their lives blighted by the fact that they have defaulted on these student loans. Shouldn't the Federal Reserve be forced, obliged by law, on demand, to refinance that for 20, 40, 50 years at 0% interest, to wipe out the bloodsuckers and the payday lenders, the term end lenders of the student loan world? That's another one. And then, shouldn't there be a method whereby the Federal Reserve coughs up trillions, as many as needed, to restore full employment while rebuilding infrastructure and specifically also dealing with the results of things like Hurricane Harvey, right? the various natural disasters, right, which go from Texas to Florida. Now we have it in Hawaii with volcanic eruptions and all that. We always need it. The Federal Reserve should be there with 0% loans. 0% loans. If hedge fund hyenas and zombie bankers could get 0% back in the crisis and have been getting something similar ever since then, why not students? Why not entrepreneurs, right? Businessmen, yes, of course. Business, productive business, though, not speculative ripoffs. So that's going to be the Left Forum. So again, we hope to have more details next week. And remember, this is the real Left Forum. That's where we will be. There are, I think, there are now competing events, except no substitutes. This is the real one. Okay, so let's look at the international situation. First of all, in the case of Iran, the Trump regime has denounced, wrecked, sabotaged the Iran nuclear accord. We had already reported back on the, I think it was the 28th of March, that after the visits of Netanyahu and Mohammed bin Salman, after the nomination of Bolton, and our argument was buttressed later by the coming of Pompeo, that's a war cabinet. We've had now, just in the last couple of days, the elevation of the former concentration camp commandant and presumably the speaking tube or tool of Pompeo, this lady, Miss Haspel, she's been brought in to be the head of the CIA. The war cabinet is now in place. This involves the Middle East. This is disastrous, I would say, but the U.S. is now going down this road. Does Trump know? Again, only his psychiatrist, and he doesn't seem to have one, would know for sure. So we are walking into a regional conflagration in the Middle East, arranged by these fundamentally inimical interests, the Israelis, the Saudis, and others. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We want to urge you to follow us from Monday through Thursday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We are available at americansystem.tv, americansystem.tv, and that is a daily 1-hour commentary straight through, and it's indispensable in weeks like this amazing roller coaster that we've been living through, surviving so far by the skin of our teeth. Yes, this is it's a terrible situation where you really need to keep up with the news from day to day, and it turns into, of course, a kind of a blur. We've commented on this strange effect of time speeding up when you have a great crisis of human civilization. The original notations on this were the French Revolution, from people on the inside of it, how time seemed to accelerate, and it means that recent events then retreat farther back into the past, and there's a general confusion in the sense of time, right? The denunciation of the Iran deal is now about 10 days in the past, but it may seem to have been much more recent. It's one of the most common commentaries from these cable TV news commentators that when you're following it intensively and in detail, it seems to be retreating very, very fast. Anyway, this is simply a disaster, and we're also getting the obvious economic blowback that the price of oil, and here we're talking about oil in this context means Brent crude. All right, this is pretty much the European benchmark. The European benchmark, Brent crude, sometimes North Sea crude, has gone over $80 for the first time since 2014, and this is mirrored somewhat less, but it's the same tendency. The West Texas Intermediate, or light sweet crude sometimes, the U.S. benchmark, that has gone well over $70. I think it's between 70 and 72. Haven't checked today, but that's where it is. That's where it's headed. So the result of this is that those poor dupes, the poor bleating masses who believed in Trump, who chose to ignore the fact that he was an unscrupulous playboy, cruel and stupid, that his entire life was trampling on the little people, the blue-collar masses and so forth, that it was really the art of the ripoff and the art of the con. They chose to ignore all that. I think they got into a kind of group hysteria based on, on regional identity or something like that. Saudi Arabia, have they come forward? Right, they're part of the chorus, at least, right, urging the U.S. on with Mohammed bin Salman in the United States. They may have done a lot more than that. They may have been on the inside, present at the creation, and so forth. It would be very easy, right, if the Saudis had been thinking about U.S. interests, they would have been able to say, well, if we break up the deal with Iran here at the beginning of May, then it's going to be a very bad thing for the oil price. So why don't we help the U.S. by overproducing for a month or two so that we can cushion that blow? Not on your life, not on your life, not the Saudis. So that's the kind of group. It's this mixture of again, cruelty and stupidity. The two polar stars, right? The two Dioscuri that the Trump regime steers by. So this is the Iran side of things. Now, in the case of the North Koreans, right? Little Kim Jong-un, and that's Chairman Kim. We have Pompeo. Pompeo is so ignorant. He's such a provincial lout that he calls him Chairman Un. That's his first name, right? Remember, in the Orient, it goes the other way around. Family name comes first, and then you get given names. So Kim is the operative part, right? He's the Kim dynasty. Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un. That's the communist dynasty, the world's only communist dynasty, as far as we know. Romania tried, but Ceausescu couldn't make it. The idea did not work. But here in North Korea, it has. So in many ways, it combines the worst of monarchy and the worst of communism. Trump, of course, thinks he's nice, honorable, excellent, and so forth. And, of course, he's a butcher, right? There's no doubt about it. And if you think that's an acceptable model of human civilization, well, then go into exile. In this case, however, as we warned, right, he is not bargaining in good faith. What did he respond to? Did he respond to the fact that the U.S. had denounced under Trump the deal with Iran, the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear accord? Quite possibly. Did he respond to these raving speeches by Bolton about applying the Libyan model, which would mean getting the nukes, bombing the country, fomenting a rebellion, and making sure the leader gets killed, and not just killed, but killed and mutilated and strung up and dragged and everything else that happened to Colonel Gaddafi. So with this, we, of course, now do not know. Will there be a June 12th summit in Singapore? Will there be a Singapore sling in the future of humanity? Well, we don't know. One question, though, what I've always pointed to now, and maybe some people might see a problem for my analysis. I want to try to explain this if in advance, if I can. The idea is you've got to learn, as the German High Command learned, in World War I, Germany had to fight everybody all at the same time. Right? The Russians coming in from the east, the French from the west, the British on the seas. They always thought the British might attempt an amphibious landing. Could have been done. British didn't do it. But the Germans, by the 1930s, they realized for the next World War, make sure it's not all at once. You want to fight them one by one. Seriatim. Not all together. So therefore, what you got to do is make sure that it's one by one, separately. In this case, you look at the situation, somebody like Bolton or Pompeo, or I'm sure Haspel now, to the extent she thinks strategically at all. She looks and she says, well, with Iran, it's probably going to be Iran first, right? This is another big problem, right? From the U.S. point of view, in World War II, you had to decide, what's it going to be, Germany first or Japan first? Well, it had to be Germany first because Germany was incomparably stronger, and of course, by conquering Europe, had become even stronger than that. So there was an absolute guaranteed real threat of German world domination, Nazi world domination. And part of this was the hypnotic appeal that Hitlerism had on the upper crust in so many countries, right? Started with Mussolini. Hitler took it to a new level. The idea is you can destroy a labor movement and essentially dictate everything. Why go to this democracy and trade? So the idea then would be Iran first. But now Iran first may have run into a little bit of a snag. We're going to talk about that in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Be right back. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio here in Washington, D.C. Now, here's the problem. If you're Bolton, if you want to pursue an Iran-first strategy, then what you want to do is be ranting, bellicose, and threatening in the case of Iran. But when it comes to Kim and North Korea, you want to be as nice as pie. And in the case of Iran, of course, the Middle East war, you can't control what some of these characters are going to do. Netanyahu is going to do ranting, raving, warmongering speeches. Mohammed bin Salman, I'm sure, right? Half of the stuff we never hear because it's not all translated, but the orators of the Saudi regime do the same thing, right? With them, it's focusing on Iran much of the time. So there are many things that just seem to fall together that it's going to be Iran first if these characters get their way, which we hope they don't, right? We're hardly fatalistic, right? We're here for fighting against war, right? We want war avoidance. But it looks like the regime, now this team, that they want Iran first, and therefore you've got to cool it with North Korea for 1 year, 18 months, something like that. But here's the problem now. If you're Bolton, the internal needs of a strategy of strategic deception, right? What the Russians call maskirovka, the maskirovka that they theorize and practice, of course. They practice it. Maskirovka, strategic deception, large-scale deception. That with North Korea, you've got to lull them, right? You got to back off. Don't make warmonger statements. The problem with that is, as a functionary of the Trump White House, you can't do that. You won't last. In other words, Trump is obsessed with people who are going to project the macho bully image 24/7, 365 days a year. In other words, you wouldn't be able to keep Trump's confidence and get him to do what you want if you don't get out there and posture and bluster and strut. And it seems to me this is part of what has happened. Obviously, Kim had plans, right? He's like, he's always compared to Lucy with the football. There's a funny one from the Washington Post where they have Trump trying to kick the football, and he goes screaming into the air, right? Trump has tried to kick the football, and he missed it, and he's gone up in the air. He's going to fall on his back or his head. Ah, says Trump. And then we have Kim, who has taken away the nuclear warhead that he wanted to kick. And Kim says to him, "You must be new at this." All right, so clearly Kim is notorious. The dynasty, right? Duplicity, lying, mendacity, prevarication, that's their mother's milk. It flows in their veins. They're going to do that. And Trump, of course, the Trump White House was caught flat-footed. They didn't have a clue. Kim was going to do something anyway, but then why make it easy for him? Bolton made it easy for him. Bolton on the TV shows last Sunday, blathering the Libyan model. Are we nuts? This is probably what Trump told him to do. So it is a departure, right, to go out and blather about Libya. That is a departure from the Iran first thing that we've been pointing to, which I believe still holds. But the problem is, it's not just the evil of the Trump regime; it's their incompetence, right? The fact that because of the internal psychological dynamics, because of the short-term, of course, needs of that hole in the ego at the top, they can't carry out a coherent strategy because they've got to always spice it up with these macho outbursts. All right, but I think we're still on an Iran first, then Kim. And by the way, let's see about Russia. Hey, how about Russia? What have they been doing? Have they done anything to improve matters? Look, right after Trump moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, right? Another act of folly. It is, of course, a violation of the United Nations Charter. Under the United Nations Charter, you are not allowed to annex territory taken by conquest. There's got to be a legitimate peace treaty that passes muster with the international community, right? The whole goal was to prevent people from going to war for territorial aggrandizement. Territorial aggrandizement was viewed as one of the main causes of World War I, also World War II. No territorial aggrandizement. Remember, Woodrow Wilson said, we want a peace with no annexations. That's the aggrandizement part, and no indemnity. So no annexations, no aggrandizement. Trump is now trampling on that. He's essentially destroyed the international order. I don't know, this has not been widely recognized, but this East Jerusalem was conquered militarily by the Israelis from King Hussein of Jordan, who personally was in that fight, June 1967. And they've annexed it. And now you move the embassy there. You're an accessory. You're an accomplice in their violation of international law. And you're trampling on the heart, the keystone of the entire United Nations system. So you want international anarchy? You want wars of conquest? Yeah, we're on the way. And that goes for all of the dummies who voted for Trump, right? Every single dupe of Trump. Is that what you wanted? Didn't he tell you that he'd be slow to intervene? All right, so what we now have from Europe. Let's start with this guy Tusk. This is Donald Tusk of Poland, right? You'd expect the guy to be pro-American. He's from Poland. Poland being one of the most pro-American places in Europe, I would have to say, often for very wrong reasons, but, of course, dictated in part by their propinquity to Russia, their desire not to be gobbled up by Russia. Here's what Tusk says. This is on Twitter. Looking at the latest decisions of Trump, someone could even think, with friends like that, you don't need enemies. Yeah, with friends like Trump, you don't need enemies. But frankly, the European Union should be grateful. Thanks to him, we've gotten rid of all of our illusions, right? That the U.S. would be judicious, benevolent, wise, far-reaching. No, just a gutter-snipe demagogue in the White House. Now, he actually says more. Tusk says, You know, one of the things we've learned dealing with the U.S. is that if you're looking for a helping hand, you're going to find it at the end of your own arm. In other words, Europe, you're on your own. That's the message. Merkel, try to find some more of this, but it's an interesting quote. Merkel says, Trump's attack on the Iran deal has created a real crisis in the global order. Yes, this is and again, it's a 1-2 punch. It's Iran and Jerusalem, and I think the Jerusalem on the ground, the Jerusalem part may be the lesser, but in terms of international law and turning points, the Jerusalem one maybe is the bigger one, but the Iran one, of course, is the one it's likely to lead to conflict in the short term, right? What if Iran decides to go to town on cyber? What are you going to do then? They could do it, right? They can sneak in and say, oh, the Russians did it. We didn't do it. The French finance minister, Bruno Le Maire, says the unilateral U.S. imposition of sanctions as economic policemen of the planet is not acceptable. This is the idea that if European countries keep trading with Iran, the U.S. will sanction those European companies and those European countries. Great. Total crisis of NATO. Thanks to Trump. Back in a minute. Welcome to the second hour of A World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, we've got this question of indictment and impeachment. Let's work up to that by going through the fact that we're now 1 year into the Mueller investigation. We are strong supporters of the Mueller investigation. The people that are slandering Mueller and his investigation are giving evidence of mens rea, that is the consciousness of guilt and sometimes even of criminal intent. It is a transparent exercise in attempting to prevent justice, obstructing justice, if you like. And there may be some people in Congress, in the House Intelligence Committee majority side, that will have to answer for this. But let's just refresh our memories. Now, we can't be exhaustive because there's just so much stuff. But, for example, bakshish. Bakshish is that wonderful word in Turkish. It means a tip. It means a shakedown. It means a bribe. It's any kind of sort of illicit money changing hands. And we're now told that there was an attempted bakshish by Michael Cohen, sources say, that he wanted $1 million from Qatar. Qatar. We're also told, and this is quite recent, that it's quite possible that another bakshish has emerged in the framework of the negotiations of the Kushner family with that same Qatar. And what we're noticing is that as the Qatar, of course, this is the troubled 666 Fifth Avenue, right? The old Tishman building, top of the sixes. That place is, of course, troubled. It's underwater. It's bankrupt. It's going to drag down the entire Kushner landlord empire. And they've been looking for money, right? This has been notorious that the closer they get to inking a deal, right, a massive infusion of cash to save the Kushners, the better U.S. relations with Qatar may appear. So that's one double bakshish on Qatar. I'm sure they know exactly what bakshish means. This is, of course, for Turkey, to be sure, the Balkans, the Middle East in general, all these places, right? Turkey, Iraq, Lebanon, into Egypt, into North Africa, across to the gates of India, from Morocco to the gates of India at various points, right? Bakshish, that's what the Ottoman Empire ran on. U.S. Empire can't really do that. So that's going on. We've also got this very interesting thing that Trump has now come out. He has exposed his Foreigners First Foreigners first, Americans last, says Trump, when it comes to ZTE electronics. It turns out not only is ZTE, they're attacked by the U.S. for using U.S. components in cell phones, cheap cell phones usually, that are sold to countries that are under other U.S. sanctions. There's also the fact that there's thought to be, by some have alleged, a backdoor into these ZTE phones that allows Beijing to snoop, to listen in. And then there's this other interesting fact that the ZTE, the availability of cheap cell phones with some satellites all ready to go, is used by Beijing for their arch-imperialistic Belt and Road program, right? The String of Pearls, the Belt and Road, the Belt and Road Forum, BARF. That's all facilitated, enabled to a significant degree by ZTE. We've already mentioned before that we have the first, in effect, criminal referral on Trump from the Office of Government Ethics to the Department of Justice. This refers to Trump's payment, $120,000 from Trump to Cohen, acknowledged in paperwork that Trump just filed, but it should have been included in the previous year's report. He's only 1 year late. Again, 1 year in the hooskow for that, if you're convicted. What else? Christopher Wiley, the whistleblower from Cambridge Analytica, testifying in the Senate, pointed out that, according to his information, when Bannon was the vice president of Cambridge Analytica, he was interested, of course, in fomenting cultural warfare among the American people. Cultural warfare. Of course, it's identical to the Russian program of divide and conquer, right? Sow dissent, cause trouble, divide and rule. And, of course, it's the same as the Republican wedge issues going back to people like Lee Atwater, Karl Rove, and others. But there you have it. And this is maybe even more dramatic, that with Bannon, it was especially a desire to suppress the black vote, to prevent black Americans from voting. What do you want to do? Hey, Bannon, you want to roll back the Civil War? You want to roll back the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments? No. It's just monstrous to suppress the black vote. So he's a Republican like every other Republican. They call it voter disengagement. We're also told by Ronan Farrow of the New Yorker that Avenatti's revelations on the Cohen bank account were based on a leaked suspicious activity report submitted to the U.S. Treasury, to the FinCEN, Financial Crimes Bureau of the Treasury, and there was a flurry of worry about whether two other suspicious activity reports have disappeared from those same files. That was the report in the New Yorker from Colin Farrow. We've had other people from the FBI Justice Department have reassured us that the underlying banking records are still going to be there. So whatever these things pointed to, it will still be there. And on, right? It's just a never-ending parade. Now, what's the counterattack? Wait a minute. A really big one. This is coming from Yahoo and BuzzFeed. It is that the talks between Don Jr., the pourparlers, the negotiations of Don Jr. and the Trump Organization with authorities in Moscow to build another Trump Tower, this is the big one, that those continued well into 2016. Remember Trump's categorical statement, I have nothing to do with Russia, no projects, no deals, no loans, no nothing. Lies, lies, lies. In flagrante delicto, caught in the act of lying. Fibber Don strikes again, right? Fibber, McGee, and Molly, now eclipsed by this regime. So Remember this one. This was originally a co-production of Michael Cohen and Felix Sater, and they were the two boys from Brooklyn that were going to get Putin in on the new Trump Tower in Moscow, tallest building in Europe, biggest building in Eurasia, and that was also going to get Trump elected president. So all going on. So now, what's the counterattack, right? The counterattack is the stuff about the mole. The mole. The FBI mole that was either sent in or that happened to find himself there spontaneously, who then provided reports about the nefarious activities of the Trump gang. Notice the Republicans are never interested in whether these crimes actually occurred. They're only interested in the process by which the news was gathered. They want everything to be pure and pristine, everything except the actual actions of their boy. We'll be back in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. We are now seeing the outlines of the Republican November election campaign coming into sharp relief. And it's pure demagogy, needless to say. It's not the same as 2016 because it's not as far as we can see, based on actual mass traction economic issues. Remember, Trump's big advantage in 2016 was that he had a kind of fake substitute. He had something that to an ignorant, unaware person, a low information voter could say, well, Trump has a job creation program, because he wants to kick out all the foreigners, and then there'll be the jobs left. Yeah, you want to be an agricultural harvest worker? You could do that today if you wanted to. Plenty of those jobs going begging right now. But you get the idea. Right now, it looks like MS-13. Again, this is tried by Gillespie in Virginia last November. Did not work. Bombed. Failed. No good. Not effective. They're going to try MS-13. They're going to try to say the Democratic Party is a part of MS-13, that the California Democratic Party in particular is owned lock, stock, and barrel by MS-13. It's all raving nonsense. And they're going to be talking then about the mole, that is the deep state, that is the conspiracy, the coup in the deep state, the permanent bureaucracy of Washington, which is conspiring to bring down this wonderful Make America Great Again government. Let's just take a look. We have we have to give the voice now. We'll give the floor to Don himself. Here we go. This was May 17th. This was the first anniversary of the probe yesterday, from when I'm talking here. Congratulations, America. We are now into the second year of the greatest witch hunt in American history, and there is still no collusion and no obstruction. That's nonsense. Where do you get that? That's solipsism, right? You're a solipsist. You think that the only reality in the world is you, and what you see going on around you is, in some version, it's like a film that God is showing you to test you. But there's nothing real out there. It's all in your head. A solipsist. Bishop Barclay, right? His famous polemics with Samuel Johnson. All right, so we're into the second year of the greatest witch hunt. No collusion and no obstruction. Not. The only collusion was that done by Democrats who were unable to win an election despite spending far more money. Well, of course, Don, rough stuff, but what do we have? 75 meetings of Trump officials, 22 meetings between Trump's team and individuals linked to Russia. And let me remind everybody, the starting point of the investigation, in my understanding, is the one indicated by the London Guardian a little bit more than a year ago, which pointed to 7 nations, 7 United States allies around the world that reported to the CIA, to Bannon in particular, that there were unusual contacts, a pattern of unusual contacts of Trump campaign officials and fellow travelers and so forth with Russian officials, GRU, SVR, and oligarchs, I'm sure organized crime as well. 7, let's see if we can take off the 7. United Kingdom, that was 1. Australia, this is the one we know about, the ambassador that Papadopoulos talked to, right, bragging that they had the dirt. The story on the dirt went from Mifsud of Malta to Papadopoulos, and then in a drunken stupor he babbled to the Australian ambassador or representative, equivalent of the ambassador inside the Commonwealth still, I guess, in London. The Russians have dirt on Hillary, and here's how they got it. So United Kingdom, Australia, getting over to the continent now. France, the Netherlands, Poland, Estonia. Let's see if I only got 6. Anyway, you get the idea. You can find this at various places. Look up the London Guardian. Once again, Britain, Australia, France, Germany, Poland, and then you got it, Estonia. So with that we got the 7. So those countries, alarmed, communicated, and Bannon has testified in the Senate. I don't know why people can't figure this out. This was an international alarm, not something inside the FBI. They'd be the last ones. It's an international alarm from alert intelligence agencies, right? Like the Estonians, who don't want, whatever their problems, they got plenty. They don't want to be sold out to the Russians. That's their ruling passion. So if it looks like an American candidate is a Moscow mule, then they'll do something about it. So this is the actual origin, right, which I think has been obscured. So again, what we're told now, the big brouhaha among the reactionaries is that there was a mole. Now, how do they know there was a mole? Oh, well, you've got to look into the lying fake news Washington Post of Bezos, no less. What a humiliation. They don't tell you where they got it, by the way. They don't believe in sources. But the original source of this would seem to be an article in the May 8th Washington Post, which talks about a mole, an informant, an FBI informant in the Trump campaign. Hey, we have Madame Vieselnitskaya is an informant of the Russian state prosecutor general. So she's in Trump Tower meeting with the leadership of the campaign. Kushner, Don Jr., Manafort, and the rest of them. She says she's an informant of Yuri Chaika, the state prosecutor, the Grand Inquisitor of Russia. Well, if the state prosecutor of Russia is in there, why are you surprised that the FBI and the DOJ are in there? So the idea is, in order to believe this garbage, you've got to be so overwhelmed with that it's so outrageous that the FBI would be probing Don and his campaign. Well, we'll have more about this in just a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. So once again, do keep the dates of the 2nd and 3rd of June in New York City open if you're anywhere near there or plan to be or can be. And remember, AmericanSystem.tv, AmericanSystem.tv. Get the hot sauce every night, every weeknight of the week. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and we hope to see you there. So the Bezos failing fake news, Washington. Remember, the Washington Post was one that Trump excluded from the campaign. So they report, yes, that the FBI had an informant inside the Trump campaign. Who is it? It's a U.S. citizen, we're told, who has provided information over the years to FBI, CIA, and that's from the Washington Post, May 8th. Now, just this past week, we had a very interesting article. I tried to give at least a quick summary on the daily American System program. This is the one that revealed the existence of Operation Crossfire Hurricane. Operation Crossfire Hurricane was the FBI investigation of Trump. Again, my contention is these stories are not complete. They're not accurate in the sense that they don't reflect what Bannon testified to, and which I knew before that, the 7 countries around the world who raised the alarm with the CIA saying, watch out, these Trump people are colluding like mad with Russia. That's the starting point. Bannon told the FBI, start a probe. You're the counterintelligence domestically, so do it. Right? CIA would be overseas counterintelligence outside the U.S. So that was this relatively long, interesting article, the Crossfire Hurricane story in the Washington Post. Matt Apuzzo, I think. So this time around, though, it's the New York Times. That's what I just said. The one that I've just gone through is the New York Times. So in this, the part that interests the reactionaries most, the only part that interests the reactionaries, is the FBI obtained phone records and other documents. This is now beginning the probe against Trump campaign and people using national security letters. National security letters became notorious during the Iraq War period when it was used. It's a way you can send somebody a letter saying you're not allowed to reveal this, but you've got to tell us things. And if you tell anybody, then you're in trouble. So it's actually more secretive than an indictment, because if you get indicted, you can go to the press and say, hey, they indicted me. But with these national security letters, that's more dangerous to do. It's a type of secret subpoena. It's like a lettre de cachet, I guess, in the old regime. And we're told, according to the New York Times this past week, at least one government informant met several times with Mr. Page and Mr. Papadopoulos, current and former officials said. Now, who could it be? I'm reading here from the Daily Caller, and they say, they quote various cable TV commentators, and they quote themselves, that this mole is supposed to be Stefan Halper, Halper. It is, I believe, the son-in-law of Ray Klein. Ray Klein, late Ray Klein, CIA officer, fairly high level. I have had conversations with him decades ago. I found him to be evasive. I found him to be untrustworthy, not one of my, not even a good source, put it that way, apart from the other qualities. So Stefan Halper, who is he? Allegedly, he's being pointed to by these sources. Daily Caller says it's him. University of Cambridge professor who was in contact with Page and Papadopoulos. So we know, again, Papadopoulos also in contact with Joseph Mifsud, the Maltese professor, supposedly a part of the Valdai series in Russia. Papadopoulos blew the secrecy, told Alexander Downer, the Australian High Commissioner to London, and that was the Australia one, right? In addition to the British, the French, the Germans, the Poles, the Estonians, that went through, and the Netherlands. Don't forget them; they've been very active. So that's the mole. Now, what are you going to do with that? We have, I think, Clapper. Clapper says, good that they did it. And I can understand that, right? In other words, you want to have a gang of unscrupulous grifters, some of them fascists, and they're supposed to come and take over your country, and you're not supposed to look inside. you're supposed to just let them run wild. I think you would say malfeasance and nonfeasance would fill the bill. I'm sure that the pressure inside, to some degree inside the FBI, but in the Justice Department, probably became overwhelming before they started with this. So this is going to be a big thing. Now, you look at the Republicans. You seriously think you're going to run an election on what? On MS-13 and on the mole? Originally, they told us it was going to be on Hillary Clinton. I said they can't be Hillary Clinton. That's so out of this world. That'll never work. That is what that's showing is they don't know what they're going to do, or they do know and they're not going to tell us because it's too embarrassing that we're going to do pure racism and this gutter snipe stuff, anti-government. Now, in the world out there, we can't go through. We just don't have time, I'm afraid, for the detailed analysis of the primaries this past Tuesday. But here we have that failing Washington Post again. Dan Baltz, their veteran national political correspondent, that there's loyalty in Trump's Midwest, but there's also unease. And here we go. If you supported Don, then since then, this is one guy, a guy from Austin, Minnesota. There has not been a day that Schminke wished that Clinton rather than Trump were president. No, he's sure that Clinton was bad. But week by week, month by month, as he has watched the events of Trump's presidency, he has become increasingly conflicted and concerned about what he has seen. The turmoil, he says, has often left him feeling motion sick. By early spring, just now, he expressed a different sentiment. He had not fully broken with Trump, but he was no longer as emotionally invested in the president or a reconstituted Trumpian Republican Party. I find myself drawing back a bit, he said. So here we are in the upper Midwest, lots of Trump dupes, and now it seems to be rolling back. In other words, they're getting sick and tired of the chaos, the clown show, the dysfunctional stuff, and the disasters. Maybe $80 oil. When that gets to 100, if you had a war, it'll be 200. Maybe that will do it. We've also got, we can't go through this now, but we've got a baby bust. We have got the birth rate under Trump, on Trump's watch. The birth rate has hit a record low in 2017. So the net effect of the Trump presidency, despite, you can write your opinion on a poll, bringing children into the world and that commitment, that's where the optimism or pessimism hits the road. Okay, U.S. birth rates hit a record low in 2017, according to the Center for Disease Control. It's way down. The pessimism has grown under Trump. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster, Tarpley in Washington, D.C. So there it is. The birth rate, the fertility rate, how many children per 1,000 women has hit a 40-year low under Trump. Trump did not turn anything around, right? So the birth rate is now 1.76 children per woman in childbearing years. The replacement figure is 2.1 children per woman. If you want to stay steady. By the way, this is why you need immigrants. You absolutely need them. You must have them. You've got to have them because otherwise you'll have an aging and shrinking population. So this is the bedrock, the demographic core of the human existence and human condition. There has been a drop starting in 2008 with the economic crisis, to be sure, but that has only accelerated. You can see it's a real dive from 2016 to 2017. And thank you, Trump, making it way to make America great again. So you're saying your policies mean that indigenous, autochthonous population growth is not going to be substandard, and you can't get anybody in. By the way, this loudmouth in New York who says, oh, you're speaking Spanish, that's illegal, you got to speak English. Listen, buddy, the First Amendment says freedom of speech. If it doesn't mean you can speak any language you want, I mean, maybe you won't be understood. That's another issue. But you have a right to express yourself any way you want. Anywhere you want. That's called the First Amendment. So this character is he's on very, very thin ice. Now, just again, we have Senator Blumenthal who points out that Trump indeed can be indicted. This is Senator Blumenthal of Connecticut. He's one of the better ones in the Democratic caucus. So he says what you can do is indict Trump now and put him on trial later. The whole question is, if he can't be indicted now, what do you do? Different answers, right? One is make him an unindicted co-conspirator. Unindicted co-conspirator was the status of Richard Nixon in 1974. Another way is to indict him now and to put him on trial later. We, of course, are holding out for indictment and immediate proceedings. And again, it's based on future harm. Jill Wine-Banks of the original Watergate prosecution team said that the opinion of Leon Jaworski, the Watergate special prosecutor, he said, well, we have a functioning Congress, we have a bipartisan House Judiciary Committee under Congressman Rodino. We can write a report and give it to them and let them draw the conclusions. You can't do that today. This would be a fool's paradise. Remember that the regulations, the doctrine that you can't indict an incumbent sitting president, that's just those are regulations. Trump tears up regulations every day. Let's tear up this one. Let's say, yes, nobody's above the law. He can be indicted. He can be put on trial. Because otherwise you'd have a situation where if the Republican Congress, House in particular, and Senate, if they decide that they're going to trample on justice and destroy the Constitution, where's your remedy? There's got to be some remedy in the system. If there's no remedy in the system, then you go back to the state of nature. In other words, civil war might loom. That's the alternative. So it's better to have peaceful resolution. Now, we are looking at Italy these days. When you had this column, right, we have this column by David Ignatius today pointing with alarm to the fraying ties with Europe, how hated Trump is with his braggadocio vulgarity. He's the caricature of what Europe has always disliked in the U.S. In Germany, 11% of Germans trust Trump to do the right thing. 86% of Germans trusted Obama to do the right thing. That may be overdoing it, but you see there's a lot of goodwill there if you know how to bring it out. But instead, we have Trump. Now, here's what's new. We had supported this past week the candidacy of Giulio Sapelli, S-A-P-E-L-L-I. Look him up. He's an anti-austerity economist. He's also an intellectual, a thinker. You ought to have such people in politics. If you don't, you're in trouble. Understands culture to a significant degree. He was a candidate for less than a day to be the Italian prime minister. Right? This is the March 5th election. The haggling is still going on after 70 days. There was a brief chance that Sapelli might make it this time. It looks like this entire thing is going to go towards a government, a presidential government kind of top-down technocratic regime, an austerity government most likely. It's going to be like the Monti government of 2010 to 2011, but this time it'll be dictated by the Italian president Mattarella. Mattarella is saying, if you guys don't come up with a government with the prime minister and other ministers by Monday, I'm going to take matters into my own hands and I'm going to impose the government that I want. Right now, today, the 5-star movement, the Grillo people, are voting through their website on the contract of government. Hey, How many Russian hackers go in there? There were hackers already breaking in last year. Were they from Russia? What's that all about? Now, of course, the big danger is if you join with other observers saying that this America First has created a golden opportunity for the Russian intelligence agencies. It's true. The most dangerous example, for God's sake, is Italy right now. If Sapelli didn't come through. Now, here's the other thing. Berlusconi is back. Berlusconi, right? In some ways, the ego ideal of Trump, right? With orgies and underage women at his estate in Arcore near Milan. He was the TV entertainment boss of the country and so forth. He had been deprived of the right to be a candidate over the past couple of years. That has now been lifted. So Berlusconi is back. And the two groups that prevailed in the last March 5th election that are now haggling, they can't agree about who should be the prime minister. So you have this guy Di Maio. Di Maio is essentially a non-entity. He's a zero from the five-star movement. He's very weak. He is a creature of Grillo, and Grillo groomed him to be weak and therefore not to represent an excessive challenge to Grillo, and now he's going to live with the long-term results of that. And then this guy Salvini, who is a tough, cynical, hardened character. Salvini, I think, is closer to Moscow. This is called the League. It was explicitly racist. It was the Lombard League. Then it became the Northern League. Then it just became the League. So it's essentially xenophobic. People from all over Italy are delighted to join it. And he doesn't do MS-13, by the way. He does gypsies. That's his big target. So there's a competition between Di Maio of the Grillini, the five-star, and Salvini of the League. Who's going to be the prime minister? You have to understand, though, there's more to it than just that, because the five-star people, they got about 230 seats in the Chamber of Deputies. The others have about 270. But there's also part of that 270 are the Berlusconi people. And Berlusconi today has shocked them all, saying, Salvini, you should go home. You have failed. You've never spoken for me. You've never spoken for my forces. You've never spoken for this majority. You should wrap it up and go home. So it looks like by Monday, we'll see Mattarella forming a top-down presidential government, which takes us back right clearly to the Weimar Republic, the presidential governments of the last phase of the Weimar Republic in Germany. So what we're hoping for is early elections in October, or that in some case, Sapelli could come forward and save the day, because he would be a rational prime minister. So go Sapelli. Get Mattarella, name you, or get elected in October.